Hello, I'm Eric Walenza, founder of IoT1, and this is the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Every episode, I interview one expert about a project that is impacting businesses today. Visit us at iot1.com to learn more, or email me to start a discussion. So Peter, thank you for joining us today. Quick overview. Peter is joining us from iCubed4, a company based in Shanghai, China, that does intelligent manufacturing systems for Chinese and foreign companies in China. Peter's the general manager, and we're very happy to have you with us today.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, a short introduction of myself. I'm in China since 10 years, and I've been working in multinational companies and then in the consulting business over the past years, focusing more on the topic of Industry 4.0 and smart manufacturing. Was a panel speaker at the Global Automotive Forum and European Chamber, British Chamber here. And then last year we have founded the company iCubed4 in order to focus on the demands here in China for digital manufacturing.
And one of the first technologies that you're developing with iCubed4 is a MES SaaS solution. So why is this your first focus? Maybe explain for the listeners a little bit about the China market and why this is necessary right now.
Yeah, I believe for the China market, why is this the right thing to go for? It's because of the easiness to implement a SaaS solution compared to a complex MES solution. So the situation here in China is that companies usually do not have very clear processes when it comes to producing something, and then going in with a big scoping and a large project doesn't usually really bring the benefits they're expecting, but will end up with a lot of changes that are more or less nice to have instead of really focusing on improving the business processes in the company. Then we have developed this SaaS solution in order to enable the entrance to digital manufacturing with a simple MES solution. Also for the smaller companies, those companies without processes in place, the approach is different. They start using the system as it is. They get basically a very straightforward process, and they change it along the way when they really use it, when they really realize what they need in order to improve.
Yeah, and I think this is a great topic for China because I talk to a lot of companies, IoT companies that are looking at entering China and working with manufacturers here. And I think one thing that a lot of them don't realize is that their solutions are contingent upon the manufacturer being able to provide data, right, and manage data. But a lot of the companies here that would be potential customers simply don't have the capability, right? First, they need an MES. Describe for us who is a typical customer here. So if we're looking in the manufacturing space, I imagine you're not serving the Bosches of the world in China. Who would you be working with?
Yeah, typical SMEs in China, mainly automotive and manufacturing clients. Not so much in the process industry. Those are rather bigger companies, but the typical company which really has a need for technology and MES are companies in the automotive industry, yes, especially because their customers are usually bigger when they're tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. Their customer could be companies like Bosch or Schaeffler, and those companies demand for a certain level of quality. They are looking more and more into electronic data interchange, and if you want to become a supplier to the big ones, you got to fulfill these requirements, else it will be difficult to win a deal for them.
Gotcha. Yeah, I was talking with Mr. Li, the chairman of Gongkongyang, earlier this week, and he made this point that a lot of the implementation among SMEs in China is not being driven so much by their recognition of a particular need. It's being driven by their customers making a requirement. And in order to meet that requirement, they have to invest in technology. Is that the same situation that you're finding, that it's usually an external requirement that's forcing investment?
Yeah, absolutely. In automotive, this is definitely like that, and not only for the Chinese companies, also for German or other Western companies who have to fulfill certain requirements from their customers. Yeah.
So I know this differs case by case, but How do you connect then with a Chinese factory? Is it generally you making, building a relationship with a factory GM, identifying that they have this problem, or is it you working with, for example, a General Motors and saying, General Motors, you're going to identify 10 facilities, suppliers that you would like to upgrade and introduce me, and then I'm going to work and help those guys get upgraded?
Yeah, both ways. So, of course, we go out to sell the traditional way, but we are also working on a cooperation with one of the big companies to exactly do what you just said. Yeah. So it goes both ways. And we especially hope to do business with the big companies because it will be easier to get into the actual user.
Gotcha. And then before we move on to the technology, one last question about the customer here. Who do you tend to work with an SME in terms of seniority level? Where are the decisions being made regarding the purchase decision as a whole? And then when you get down to the more micro implementation and scoping decisions, are those all done at the top, or is there delegation?
Yeah, that's also looks a bit different to dealing with Western companies and Chinese companies. The best case is, of course, meeting the decision maker, the CEO or the general manager right away. And those are usually the ones who make the final decision. The missing part here is the link to the people further down in the organization, that the owner or the manager of the company makes a decision to implement a system, doesn't talk to the actual end users before making that decision. And then, of course, it can become a very challenging implementation project. Yeah. So what we advise in the very beginning is already to establish a key user concept, so that we can immediately from the beginning on, when we start talking about the project, not only talk to the high level people, but also to those who will use it at the end, to make sure that we mitigate the risks.
Yeah, no, great advice. Just from a different angle, my wife is working in M&A and also has this experience often that the chairman, the president is making the decisions, but not communicating down low. And you often have to coach or prod to an extent to make sure that communication does happen. Otherwise, you're going to run into some bottlenecks once you get into implementation. Okay, so tell us about the system. How does a SaaS MES differ from a traditional?
Yeah, I believe looking at SaaS versus traditional, there are a few very big differences. First of all, in a SaaS environment, you have multiple customers using one application. How we realize it, we share the applications, but we separate the data. So let's say we have 50 customers use the same application, and that brings down the cost a lot, and finally also the price eventually for the customer. The database, the separate data hosting for the different customers, takes away the fear of the customers that their data is being mixed with the competition. For example, that's a big topic in China, even though there is actually no worry that the data is going to be mixed, but it's something that helps, at least here. Then you, of course, in a SaaS environment, you pay a monthly or a yearly charge. You don't have large investments for data centers and staff hiring. You have very low or even no capital expenditure, while you have very large capital expenditure when you go into a traditional on-premise hosting system. And you have a very clear OPEX, of course. You know what you pay per user per month. While in a traditional environment, you never know what kind of surprise you will have when you look at your operational expenditure. On the long run, staff costs increase, while IT costs decreases. However, over the longer run, you will have an increase in operational expenditure when you run your own data center, while the more customers we have using on our system, running on our system, we are actually reducing our costs and reducing the prices for end users. Those are probably some of the biggest. And another factor is security. Most of the companies believe cloud or private cloud, and this is a private cloud solution, is not secure. But the point is, when you are an automotive company, your core business is doing automotive, building parts, producing parts. It's not doing IT. Our core business is doing IT. So of course, we are in a much better position to provide redundant, reliable and secure systems than an IT department with 2-3 people. That's on a different scale. So it's just a matter of trust. The fact is security and reliability is actually higher in the cloud. It is just a matter of trust.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also a matter to an extent of updates. So a traditional system might be updated once a year or a couple times a year. What does it look like from a SaaS situation? So both in terms of change requests and also in terms of over-the-air updates.
Yeah, that's also a completely different approach. So as you said, in a traditional environment, you get updates 1 to 3 times a year from Microsoft, for example, while when you run on a SaaS environment, the SaaS provider captures usage data and performance data from the application automatically. So you're able to determine which parts of each of the application is used more than others. And you're able to find out how much the load is on certain parts of the application, so you can respond accordingly and extend it and update it accordingly. You can run surveys with your customers, and then they will receive their change requests at a certain point in time. Obviously not guaranteed with the next release, but since we will do 3 to 6 releases a year, there is a high chance that customers also get their change requests, which they actually would pay for, on the long run would get them free.
So let's talk a bit about the, you could say the user interface or the complexity of the solution. So obviously one of the challenges in China is traditional manufacturers often don't have the IT capability to manage a complex solution. So there's some value in simplifying. Often they also just don't have the need for you could say a full service MES. What does it look like in terms of capabilities and in terms of interface for your SaaS solution?
Yeah, it's web-based, so it's got to work on phones. That's very important. So certain functions, like the warehousing function, you can operate from your iPhone if you want. There is an app for it. The same for each of the functions has its own user interface. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a video podcast here, so else I could show it to you. But it's a simple, easy to use interface, which everybody can use. You only see what you're supposed to see. So if you're a worker on a machine or on an assembly station, you have only 2-3 fields to fill in. And then it's important to use scanners to eliminate paper in production, so you can actually or you capture data from machines in order to enter data into the system. So we reduce the complexity of the user interface to a minimum, or we even try to take them away. That's especially for automotive important. The more steps you put into the production, the less productivity you will have. And when you have very high takt times, you don't want to have a user entering data manually. So less user interfaces.
Gotcha. Now, I imagine this is not as customized as a traditional, although obviously you can customize it to an extent per user. If we're looking at functions or capabilities, what is the trade-off, or how does this differ from you could say a full service traditional MES system?
Yeah, the default solution doesn't include capturing machine data, for example. For that, we have an add-on which allows us to capture the machine data, store it locally on the customer side, and then upload it periodically to the cloud system. Another one is the integration with different existing systems. We can integrate with ERP and warehouse management solutions. Integration with product lifecycle management, for example, is not foreseen. Then the master data, obviously we use BOMs and routings, which we bring together, and we call it a technology. That is less complex as you would have it, for example, in an SAP system. which you can run globally with global products, global materials. Those kind of characteristics we don't offer.
What about from the implementation side? So obviously for a traditional MES, this is a big part of the cost and also the timeline for getting a platform up and running. What does it look like? Maybe if you can just walk us through the steps from scoping through implementation, and then I imagine you're going to potentially do a simple implementation and then have some iterative improvements.
Yeah, the approach is different, as we already said in the very beginning. So there is not much blueprint, actually, as we would see it in the traditional projects. The average duration is 2 to 3 months for an implementation. And we only have 3 phases. We start with a preparation phase where we meet the team, have a kickoff. We go into a planning session with all key users involved. We do a requirements collection while we provide the training. So we do a training together with everybody involved in the project, and at the same time collect the requirements. Users can say, okay, this doesn't really work that way for us. And after assessing these requirements, we make the decision whether they need changes to be implemented already during the project or not. Depends on the importance of the change. And then we get the customer started with data collection and cleansing, provided there is data. Then in the second phase, we go right into realization. So we set up the system, we implement those changes which are relevant for the implementation, which cannot be postponed. We do training, and we support the key users to train the end users. We continue with data collection and cleansing, and then finally we come to the go live day, and after go live we would support for a certain period of time depending on the maturity of the customer, and we go through the lessons learned, which is an important thing for us in order to improve our project method on the long run and become more efficient.
And within that process, where do you see the challenges? Where do you face bottlenecks, cost overruns?
Actually, as long as we stick to our implementation model, it's fine. The discussions come when change requests are on the table, obviously. Yeah. So that's more of a commercial thing. And then it depends how much commitment we get from the customer for how long he signs a contract with us. Then obviously we can turn some screws and bend the system to a certain degree, also without extra charges. So we try to balance it out with the contract.
One point that Mr. Li from Gongkongyang had was, I think was quite insightful, was that within China, companies often ask, how do I become an Industry 4.0 player? And the answer is, I think you don't. That's not the objective, right? The objective is to become more profitable. And the question then is, how do these technologies help you to become more profitable, right? Becoming Industry 4.0 is not an end in itself. The danger of this approach for trying to become Industry 4.0, first of all, is you're probably going to scope wrong, because that's just not a business objective in itself. But the second is that in an environment like China, if you have a very sophisticated system that is, you could say, significantly more sophisticated than your supply chain partners, you're going to become, to an extent, an island, unable to take data from partners, unable to share data with partners. And a lot of the value then of the systems you've invested in is just not going to be realized. So how do you address this in ecosystems where the value that you're trying to create requires that partners also invest to an extent in IT systems to be able to share data, and that they then have an open mind and the business processes set up to share that data in an effective way?
Yeah, this is what we want to achieve with our solution. So we want to help companies to move up to a certain standard in order to be able to provide data, to have data. And then the next logic step is, how can we integrate these companies? How can we integrate demand and supply here? So we have an interface which allows you to electronically interchange information with your suppliers. The supplier just needs a web browser for that. It's very simple, securely. Then in the next step, we're looking to find a strong partner to build up an end-to-end platform. And I guess this is what you were referring to, that also customers who look for suppliers are able to electronically send demands to suppliers, get traceability in quality and production information in real time from their suppliers so that they know when they can expect the deliveries. And this kind of integration is what we are looking at to build up in the midterm. Yeah. So, but overall, of course, we are convinced of the business idea of iCubed4 is come up with a simple solution to allow especially the Chinese SMEs to take a first step into technology in production. And with that step, being able to serve on a certain level to a certain customer base.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk pricing. I think one of the core value propositions of any SaaS is typically the price point. So what are we looking at if we're comparing? Let's compare the technology and also the implementation cost, maybe as separate buckets. So what does this look like, MES SaaS versus traditional implementation?
Yeah, traditional implementation, if we would run a scoped project, also in the past, it's round about 6 months standard, and then it would be 1 to 2 million, depending on the size of the project, really, depending on the requirements, how many consultants are on there, plus license fees, obviously. And if you look at, for example, SAP, then you're spending another few millions on the license, plus 22% maintenance fee every year. For us, we are able to offer an implementation for 200,000 to 300,000 renminbi, and then we look at monthly prices of 5,000 to 15,000 RMB, depending on the number of users, depending on the number of functions the customer is using. Yeah. So we're changing really from. And another item, of course, when you go for a traditional way, is you have to host the system by yourself, or you need to manage the system by yourself. No matter where you host it, in the cloud or in your data center, you still have to manage it. While here, you only need an internet connection and a web browser.
Yeah, so that's really a 5 to 10x difference in pricing. Yeah. So before we end, I want to talk a bit about the fast follower or the copycat, or you could just say the competitive environment in China. So China is fiercely competitive. If you bring a good solution to the market in China, there are other companies that are going to be watching you, and they're going to be following up with similar solutions soon. With this type of solution, do you see the competitive environment as being a threat, or do you think it's a good thing if MES gains traction, even if it means that there's more competitors in the market? How do you view the competitive environment?
Well, I think there is no real competition yet in the SaaS MES market. I haven't really found a real competitor here in China, a local one. There is one, but it looked rather fakey. They for sure don't provide proper SaaS service. This is just a MES hosted in the cloud, and that's a big difference to offering a SaaS service. Offering systems just hosted in the cloud doesn't mean you're actually offering a SaaS service, and it will not reduce your cost as a SaaS provider when you have separate installations for each customer. And then you're not able to offer these prices. And we are a German invested company, but we are offering it for Chinese prices. So right now I don't see competition, but of course the big ones, they are going in the same direction. Oracle, SAP, of course as well, but they're playing in a different league. So I believe till now we are serving a segment where the big ones don't look at. It's really the small and the medium-sized companies who would never be able to afford a big brand like SAP or Oracle or GE or Siemens out there. But let's see. I guess there will be fast followers coming up.
Yeah, we'll see. Merrick's put out a good report on the Made in China 2025 policy recently, and one of the points that they made was that enterprise or industrial software was actually the category that's the most difficult for Chinese companies to enter into. Their forecast was that it's going to be another decade or so before we see a really strong competitive environment in China among local suppliers. Whereas if we're looking more at the control level sensors, a lot of, in a lot of categories, the Chinese companies are already there or they'll be there soon. So we'll see how this actually plays out, but maybe you will be one of the last categories to actually face some stiff local competition.
This just a quick comment on this. This is indeed that the biggest difference here is that usually when you come from a Western company, you have a technical background, but you understand the business as well. So you're able to provide technology consulting services instead of pure technology.
Yeah, no, good point. Okay, last question. What is one interesting technology on the horizon that you think people need to be paying attention to in China because it's going to be shifting markets or shifting how people operate in the next 5 years?
MES.
It was an easy one. Okay, tell me, how can people learn more about you? How can they contact you if they'd like to reach out?
Drop me a mail to peter@iCubed4.com. I should probably spell this out. Peter, Peter, at iCubed4.com.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much for sharing. I think a very interesting discussion into MES SaaS. I wish you all the success in the world, and I look forward to talking more in the coming years on this topic.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks for the opportunity to taking the podcast today.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. We help to accelerate digital transformation by advising business leaders on how to integrate IoT technologies into their operations and products. We appreciate your thoughts, suggestions, and of course your reviews. And if you have an interesting project, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. You can write me at eric.walenza@iot1.com.